Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Tuesday, August the 23rd. And welcome to our commentary. We had a technical problem before, so we're doing the video for the second time. So if you were watching the first one, I hope you can catch up and join us now. I have a couple of issues that I want to get into today. I have a post at the American Thinker this morning about violence in Mexico, and I want to get into that today. And then there's another story out there about how the Department of Justice is leaking information about this raid on President Trump's home to the New York Times. And this is causing Professor Jonathan Turley from basically, writing a very interesting post this morning saying that this is making the Attorney General look pretty bad, because the Attorney General, on one hand, is saying that everything has to be secret, and on the other hand, somebody is leaking information to the Washington Post. So that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing to be leaking information about something as serious as this to the New York Times. Now, leaking happens all the time. I'm not naive. So, leaking is unfortunately a way of life in Washington, D.C. But this is a pretty serious investigation going on. And again, I don't think this is helping the Attorney General when he's got people in his department who are leaking information to the New York Times. He can stop it if he wants to. I mean, he could, but or maybe he's part of it. I don't know. But it's not making him look good to have of this magnitude, and especially about a story like this. But the story in the New York Times says that there were like 300 documents that apparently the FBI was concerned about, or the Department of Justice was concerned about. But they don't go into a lot of details, and we don't know who the sources are, and that's another problem when you read all of these stories based on leaks and people close to the information. We all remember the Russia story a couple of years ago. So if there's leaking going on, they need to stop it. They need to stop it. But again, we don't know who the leaker is, and it's the New York Times, and obviously the New York Times is not going to tell us who the source is. They don't have to, but I think it needs to stop. Well, let's talk a little bit about a post that I have over at the American Thinker this morning, and that's about violence in Mexico. The violence in Mexico is reaching numbers. This year, it's going to be greater than last year, and last year was greater than the year before. And in many ways, it's sort of a breakdown in violence and in society in Mexico. I'm sure you've heard about these towns where they're burning up taxis, and it's basically a fight between cartels. It's Cartel A fighting Cartel B, and they're fighting for territory. That's basically what it is. But of course, the violence reaches the communities and people, and after a while, it becomes a problem for the United States. So I have a post over at the American Thinker calling on the president of Mexico to do something about this. Now, I'm sure they're trying, but it's a pretty big task. But they put in place, the president of Mexico put in place a policy a couple of years ago. The previous president had sent the army into the cities to put down the cartel violence. It worked fairly well, but it was not as good perhaps as it could have been. But at least the cartels understood that the army was going to go after them. The current president decided to change the approach and adopt a more liberal approach. And in fact, it's called hugs, not bullets. That's a translation from Spanish to English: hugs, not bullets. And it's been a total failure. It's been an absolute failure. The violence keeps going up. The cartels get more ferocious. And, what you have is a situation in Mexico where cities are not safe, particularly the smaller cities. If you go to Mexico City, you're not going to have that problem, or Monterrey. But a lot of the smaller cities where the resources to fight crime are smaller, that's where the violence is becoming quite severe. And this is not helping the United States, because this cartel violence is happening on the border. And also because of these small towns that are being impacted by this, a lot of those people will come north and will try to come to the United States seeking safety from this violence. So this is a very bad situation. And there are limited things that we can do. This is more of a Mexican problem, but there are limited things we can do. And one thing we can do is to get a tougher policy on the border. I mean, we've got to get tougher on this side and make it more difficult for these cartels to bring in drugs and so on. Because as long as our door is open, they've got access to a business. And that's what this is about. Look, these cartels are selling drugs in the United States. It's a business. Okay. They're operating as a business. And we're buying this stuff. Let's not kid ourselves. We're the ones consuming it. So we need to stop consuming it too. But as long as we're consuming and they're selling and the door is open, well, you've got a huge problem. You've got a huge problem. And Mexico can do something. But we are going to have to become more concerned about our consumption as well, because our consumption is driving the business. Remember, we buy the stuff. We're the ones consuming these drugs. And that's something we're going to have to address either as a national policy or however we do it. But at the same time, the Mexican government is going to have to take a tougher posture on the violence in Mexico. I don't know if they can. I'll be honest with you, because the cartels are so powerful that I'm not sure that they can. I'm skeptical as to how much the Mexican government can actually do with respect to this problem. It is such a big problem. Now, a couple presidents ago, President Calderon, roughly 16 years ago, he came in and he sent in the army, and he became very aggressive, and he really put down a lot of the violence. But it became complicated because there were lots of human rights abuses, and that, of course, happens sometimes when you put thousands of troops on the ground. Sometimes there are abuses, but at least it did control the violence a little bit. The next president of Mexico decided that he was going to focus more on the police and making the police more efficient, and that worked a little bit. That worked a little bit to a point. It worked a little bit to a point, but now, this president decided, like I said before, that he was going to do hugging rather than going after the cartels. And that's been a total complete failure. I mean, a total complete failure. So we need to encourage Mexico to take a tougher stand. But let's not remember, we're the ones consuming. The market is over here. The market is in the United States. And we got to understand that too. We can't just blame Mexico. We got to understand that we're the ones here in the United States who are consuming billions of dollars in illegal drugs. In fact, there's no official figure for this, of course, but I've read that unofficially it could be 30 or 40 billion dollars that we are consuming through these cartels in Mexico. That is more money that Mexico gets from oil, just to put it in perspective, okay, of how much money that is and what a tremendous business this is. Remember, it's a business. This is a business. This is not, they're not bringing these drugs over here for any other reason than because they can sell them. It's a business. And we have got to do something about demand, not just supply. We got to do something about demand. We got to we have to close the border. That's the first step. We have to sit down with the Mexican government and say, we're going to close the border. The border is no longer open for this kind of activity. It's simply not open. Let me say hello to a couple of folks, Sally, Marlene, they're checking in, a couple of others as well. Thank you for your comments as always. So it's a big problem. The border is a big problem. Now, speaking of the border and the problem on the border, the mayor of Washington, D.C. has been requesting the National Guard, and the National Guard turned her down again, which is a good thing. Problem. I mean, I understand what's happening in Washington, D.C. They have the same problem that these little towns on the border are having. They don't have the resources. So I understand, but it is kind of comical to be a sanctuary city and at the same time, complain about the people you're creating the sanctuary for. It is, can I say hypocritical? Would that be a good way to describe it? Probably so. Well, Dr. Fauci is moving on. You've heard about that. He's moving on, and we wish him well. But Dr. Fauci, there's a great post. I think it's in the Wall Street Journal. I didn't read the whole thing. I just read the summary. But they're basically saying that Dr. Fauci had contributed a great deal to the confusion that we have. And I think that's true. I think whether he meant to do it or whether it was just out of control, Dr. Fauci did not help the situation in 2020. And as I continue to say, and I'll say it again, the fact that it was a presidential year and the fact that the COVID became the only thing the Democrats could use against Trump, I think that's what contributed a great deal to the confusion and all of the bad feelings and all of the problems that we had with COVID. COVID was real. I'm not underestimating or downplaying COVID. It was real. It was a real pandemic. But the way it was treated was very politicized by the Democrats, by people like Dr. Fauci, and unfortunately by many in the media as well. So poor Dr. Fauci, he should have stuck to being a scientist, but he decided that he wanted to be on TV every 5 minutes. So he became part of the political problem. Well, I just saw this note. You've heard that President Biden wants to cancel student debt. So they took a poll on this, and like 60% of the American people think that that's inflationary. Well, yeah, it is. It is inflationary. It is inflationary when you basically subsidize these people. I think it's a grave mistake. I think it's morally a grave mistake to say to people, we're going to write off your student debt, but these other guys over here, like my sons, they're going to pay their student debt. I think that's morally wrong, and that's government should not do stuff like that. It does not help the situation one bit when we are canceling student debt for people who should be paying it back. Now, if they need more time to pay it back, okay, we can work that out. But canceling it, I think it's a big mistake. Well, a couple of things on this day in history that I want to close with. Happy number 91. Now, this was a bit of a shock to me, but happy number 91 to Barbara Eden. Now, all of you remember Barbara Eden, I'm sure, as the genie in I Dream of Jeannie. And she's 91 today, which means that when she did that show, she must have been, I guess, in her late 30s, maybe 40, I don't know, when she did that show. And I have to admit, I thought she was a lot younger than that. She looked a lot younger than a woman at that age. I thought she was like a 20-something woman when she was doing that show, I Dream of Jeannie. And I think that's one of the greatest shows of the 1960s. Very funny show. I guess they show that from time to time. But that was a great show. The idea of that show was just absolutely great. And so Barbara Eden is 91 today. That's pretty remarkable. That she looks as good as she does as 91. That's a good thing. Maybe she took very good care of herself. It sounds like she did, if she can look that good at 91. Well, let me tell you something else on this day in history. My friend Sally, the history teacher, is going to like this one. On this day in 1814, First Lady Dolley Madison saved the Washington portrait at the White House. The British were getting close to the White House. They burned down the White House. So Dolley Madison, First Lady Dolley Madison, made sure that the famous George Washington portrait in the White House was removed and saved. And I think that particular image is still in the White House. I'm not sure. But Dolley Madison came to the rescue of George Washington, and that was a good thing on this day in 1814. So that's 200 years ago. But when I read that in school, when I read that story, aside from the fact that it shows, Dolley Madison's, or First Lady Dolley Madison's, commitment to the new nation, the United States, but I think it also showed you how much they respected George Washington, because I think that had a lot to do with it. They respected George Washington so much that they just couldn't imagine his portrait, because he was dead by now. Remember, he died in 1799, so he'd been dead for 15 years. And I think they revered George Washington so much that they just couldn't think of that image of George Washington, that portrait of George Washington getting burned by the British. I think that had a lot to do with, frankly, the fact that they thought so highly of George Washington. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening today. And then thank you for all your comments as well. And if you get a chance, check out my post over at The American Thinker. I post it over there, and then I repost a copy of it at my Facebook page as well as my blog. And it's also going to appear tonight on Babalu, by the way. They always post my stuff over there as well. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later. This is, by the way, I just want to clarify, the post that I'm talking about is not the one about Dolley Madison. That's not the one I'm talking about. The one that I'm talking about is the one about Mexico and the violence in Mexico. Have a good day. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.